Okay, mate. Just one last one. It's a bit of a vague one that I sent you, but just if you had a funny story about interviewing one of the Gallagher brothers or just a big name in music, really.
Yeah, well, I did interview Noel Gallagher just about 2, 3 years ago, which was very belated because there was a time that he would have been him and his brother would have been top of my list, and really, if we're honest, most journalists' lists because there is no people, not just in music but in any area of public life, who have delivered so consistently absolute elite level interviews to anyone they've ever spoken to. I mean, they should be given some sort of knighthood or OBE for services to journalism because they are just superb. And I remember just reading interviews from the NME, like occasionally NME would publish like just an Oasis special and it would be like 10 years worth of interviews. And I'd read it like I was reading a comic. I would get these and I would just devour them and like laugh out loud, like be crying laughter, like I was reading a copy of Viz. They were so funny. And so I always wanted to interview both of them for different reasons. And for the Big Issue, who I now write for, I've got a column in the Big Issue and occasionally they give me interesting interviews to do. And I was delighted when they asked a couple of years ago, we go and interview Noel Gallagher. And he was, everything I would want him to be. I turned up, I pressed record. I might have set him off with one small question. And then after that, I just had what turned out to be about 2 hours worth. And the funny thing about that was when I went in, the presswoman sort of accosted me outside before I went into the room where he was sitting and said, I know you might have already been told this over email, but I can't stress to you enough. He does not want to talk about Liam. He does not want any of that. And I said, it's fine. It's old ground. Everyone's talked about that. It's done to death. I don't want to talk about that. And they said, okay. And I suppose a bit of me did, but I understood their point of view and I was respectful of it. And I thought, Joe, what? It doesn't matter. It's Noel Gallagher. You could talk to him about the fucking weather and it's still going to be absolute gold, And of course, I go in and we get on quite well because it turned out, we had a couple of mutual friends and he'd listened to me on Talk. He's a Talk Sport fanatic. And I, for quite a few years, presented on Talk Sport. So we kind of immediately, there was a familiarity. And I would say within 15 minutes, without any prompting from me, he had brought up Liam and just gone off on one about him for like half an hour without me being able to interject once. And the PR sitting in the room just looking horrified and confused and me just loving it and thinking, well, my hands are clean. I didn't fucking prompt any of this. He just can't help himself. So, that was really great. I interviewed Thom Yorke once for a TV thing I was doing. And he was really quite rude and hostile. It was actually when I was reporting for ITN about the war in Iraq, and I was reporting on the Stop the War efforts, the campaign groups that were formed, and there's various things going on to sort of campaign outside Parliament, mostly against going to war in Iraq. Thom Yorke became quite a prominent figure in that, and I went down to interview him in Parliament Square. And he struck me straight away, a bit like what I said about Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, as a bloke who had decided that all journalists were working to a secret agenda dictated to them by Murdoch or some other shadowy, press baron who was in the pocket of politicians and all those conspiracy theories. And really, I was just some fucking dickhead who liked listening. I was just some dickhead who liked listening to the Bends. Right. And just took the opportunity to go and meet the bloke who sang the songs. And but he was really like, it was him and I think it was Ed O'Brien, was there. And Ed O'Brien was very polite and kind. And every question I asked about the war, Thom Yorke made this motion like he was stirring a huge bowl of porridge while sneering at me. Wow. And in the end, I said, what are you? I just had to break off because Ed O'Brien looked awkward and uncomfortable. And I said, why are you doing that? Sorry, we're on camera. I said, sorry, what? Every time I ask you something, you do this thing for ages, right? And he goes, you're just stirring the pot, aren't you? That's what your job is. You're stirring the pot. And I was like, literally, I've got no idea what you mean, but fine, whatever. And then we just continued the interview and Ed O'Brien just answered all the questions. And Thom Yorke just sort of, You know, I could have said anything. I'd say, so what, you know, what do you think? What do you think your chances are of actually succeeding in stopping the government going to war? You know, an innocuous, pretty softball question. And it was all this stuff. Like, you know, a cynical guffaw, as if, yeah, did your paymasters tell you to ask that one? And I'm like, mate, I don't fucking know. No one's. I just was told to go down to Parliament and interview Thom Yorke. We don't get briefed, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, he was very like that. And that was a disappointment because I really am a huge Radiohead fan, as I suppose most right-minded people are.
Mm. It's weird. It's like, why has he agreed to do press if he's got that attitude?
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing was during that period in my career, I was doing shifts as a news reporter for ITN. So after my show had finished after a year, the show called The Edit, they asked me to stay on and actually be like a sort of a traditional news reporter on like the 7 o'clock news, where it's like Sam Delaney, Parliament Square, which I wasn't very good at and didn't particularly enjoy, but I did it because I needed the work, and it was quite interesting work as well. And so, but I was still writing. So, and I had still had my kind of longish sort of pseudo Britpop Liam Gallagher hairdo, right? But in the daytime, I would wear a suit because I had to, because I was on the news doing news reports. And in the evening, I would finish and I would get changed and I would go to a gig and interview a band. So it was like a double life. And I think that sometimes if you're interviewing someone like Thom Yorke and you turned up in a suit, speaking in your best voice, minding your P's and Q's with an ITN cameraman with you, it maybe made him feel a little bit more cynical and hostile than had I turned up saying, hey, I'm here from The Guardian to interview you about your latest record. Maybe he would have been more open to discussing things with me. So things like that make a difference. But I remember doing a live two-way with the presenter, who was Kirsty Young, on another event, and I had one suit because I was young. I had bought one suit to do this job, but what I didn't have was a nice overcoat for when you were doing pieces to camera outside, and you wear a nice smart overcoat to go with it, don't you? But I didn't have one of those. Of course I didn't. I barely had a suit. But what I did have was a vintage Parker, like a proper old mod Parker, which was a 1960s US Army Vietnam jacket. And I had this long hair, and it was very cold, so my nose was bright red and my hair was everywhere and my eyes were watery from the cold. And while I was trying to stay focused and do a live two-way with the presenter in the studio, the producer, who was quite a good laugh, was like speaking in my earpiece, saying to me, oh, we've just had an email in from one of our regular viewers saying, why is there a tramp presenting the news? And then I just thought, yeah, this job's not for me.